This is Josh Bycer from GameWisdom.com. I hope you enjoyed this Critical Thought, your daily discussion on game design. Hello and welcome to today's Critical Thought. As always, thank you to 911 subscribers here on YouTube. I hope everyone is enjoying the content, and if you're new, be sure to like and subscribe. The vote for the 900 Let's Play is still going on. Your choices are between a play of Aquaria, Bastion, and Fez. Right now, we actually have somewhat of an exciting play as all three have votes for them. So, be sure to leave a comment in any of the critical thoughts. I'll give it a little bit more time until we close things up, and I will be more than happy to play. Alright, before we get going with today's critical thought, just want to give you guys the heads up. I'm going to be dedicating a critical thought to almost a fireside chat about the Game Wisdom YouTube channel and the site, probably in the coming days. We won't be talking about a topic for that one, but I want to get your input on some ideas I've been having. So be sure to tune in for that. I'm also going to be starting my Hitman play as I saw that they finished Season 1. So I'm interested to sit down and see if I can actually learn those games. But let's get going with today's topic. And this is the one that I was going to talk about a few days ago when I had 0 hours of sleep. And this is 2D versus 3D design. The video game industry is quite unique in this aspect when it comes to the 2D genre. Not only is it still around, but it is certainly thriving thanks to independent developers, games like Shovel Knight, Super Meat Boy, the recent release Owl Boy, I believe, and probably a lot more that I've forgotten that are being released. But what makes things so different about the game industry is that normally whenever new technology comes out or new philosophies or foundations, the old stuff gets thrown away. Radio shows were replaced by TV, color was replaced, or black and white was replaced by color, and you get the picture. And traditionally, we would have expected 2D games to have fallen by the wayside. No one would want to play them. But that is not the case. And I think this is where the art element of the video game industry comes into play. Because 2D games are not considered, for a lot of people, to be inferior. There are some unique pros and cons about 2D that we don't see in 3D and vice versa. And that's what I want to talk about today. And we'll start with some of the pros. I think the first one should be obvious. It is easier to work with, and that is in all aspects of making a game. Design, art, and programming. Anyone who has tried building a game before can certainly attest to the fact that working in 2 dimensions is a lot easier. From a design point of view, the 2D frame there basically helps you out with a lot in terms of framing how you want the character to move, how you want to set up challenges, and it's just easier to process compared to a 3-dimensional space. Also, a 2-dimensional camera is a whole lot easier to design than a 3D one. And talking about the changes in camera design, that's another topic very easily. But in 2D, since you're only dealing with, again, the cardinal directions, left, right, up, down, or west, east, north, and south, it's a lot easier to design levels, it's a lot easier to focus the camera, and it just makes it easier to present the game. And from a programming standpoint, the same thing. It's easier to think in 2 dimensions than it is to design and program a 3-dimensional game. Now, I saved art for last because that takes us to the next point. 2D games have really developed a strong sense of aesthetic design. And you can do that a lot easier in 2D than you can in 3. We have seen many examples of 2D games with unique or stylish aesthetics. Super Meat Boy, Braid, the recent release Owl Boy, even Mario games have their own sense of style. And another example of a game that I am dying to play is Cuphead, which is supposed to be, it's going to be using all the hand-drawn animation style from classic cartoons. And again, when you're dealing with that two-dimensional plane, it's a lot easier to design this kind of aesthetic. You couldn't do a game like Cuphead or even something like Owlboy in 3D and have it look exactly the same. Also, there are examples like Soul and Sanctuary and Darkest Dungeon. That again, that kind of aesthetic just won't look as sharp and as vibrant on 3D models as it does in 2D. Now, another example of what makes 2D still work today is that these games are very much skill-dependent titles. Again, the platformer genre pretty much lives and dies in 2D for the most part. You see a lot of variety and a lot of challenge in these games. Super Meat Boy, for instance, has no real abstracted elements. It's how well you play the game and how well you can make these micro adjustments that determine whether you win or lose, as opposed to any kind of RPG or abstracted elements. Now, there are of course exceptions like the Darkest Dungeon and other games built on like RPG rules but set in a 2D world. There's of course some weird exceptions like the Metroidvania games. As an interesting aside, there's the really amazing game Tomba that came out for the PlayStation 1 era that was kind of like a really good case of action and adventure elements, featuring lots of challenges but still being focused on a platformer world. If you haven't played that game, be sure to check that out. I think they're both available on PSN. Now, another case for where 2D games work and why they're still skill focused is how the levels are presented. Levels are built on the fact that the player sees everything. The two-dimensional camera shows you exactly what you're looking at. You can see completely what are the challenges around the player, how the platforms move. There is very little in terms of things off-screen affecting the player. In classic 2D games, basically the screen itself was what existed in the world. If an enemy went off-screen, they no longer exist. Platformer, once you go far enough to the right, the world behind you, just keeps disappearing. And that, again, makes it very easy to learn. Now, with that said, there are some obvious disadvantages for 2D and why 3D does work in a lot of cases. First one is storytelling. It is a lot easier to make interesting and thought-provoking stories in 3D than it is in 2. It comes down to the character models, how characters can emote in 3D. It just makes the world and the story come that much more alive in 3D than 2. Most 2D games, of course, deal with dialogue boxes, and again, not realistic characters, but that's the point of 2D. But strong 3D has definitely led to some very amazing stories. And you can see the difference in looking at a game like the original Metal Gear Solid versus Metal Gear Solid 4 and 5, and how the vastly superior 3D engine helps to tell those stories. Now, another point, and this is actually kind of fascinating to talk about, 3D games are better at presenting a sense of place or environment compared to 2D. Even though 2D games lead to some very challenging games or challenging level designs and challenges, they're not as interesting or as memorable as 3D is. And the perfect example of that would be the Soulsborne games. Again, Bloodborne, Dark Souls, etc. Even though the 2D games can present a more compact challenge, they lose that sense of personality that we see in 3D. When you play a game like the Soul series, those levels will stick out and become memorable to you. We all remember going through Blighttown for the first time, Anno Lundo, Sen's Fortress, the areas in Dark Souls 3 that I'm forgetting right now. Even though the player can't see everything in one place or in one screen, the world itself basically comes alive thanks to that additional plane. And it's kind of funny. 2D games don't abstract the player's actions, but they abstract the world around them. And 3D games typically do the opposite. They have RPG elements, and they still have that kind of abstraction built into it. but the world itself feels more realized. And another point there is scale. You can do scale justice in 3D rather than in 2D. Because the world and the environments are abstract in a 2D setting, you really don't get that sense of scale that we do in 3D games, such as exploring giant places like in the Souls games, going through and fighting the Colossi in Shadow of the Colossus. You can't do that in the same sense of awe and just that imposing scale when we're dealing with just 2 dimensions. Another big point about where 3D beats 2D is definitely in the complexity standpoint. That third dimension really opens your game up for more complicated mechanics and things that you can do. When you're playing a game like Overwatch, for instance, and you're able to move in and out of the different planes, it sets up for more variety in terms of characters and their motions. Again, characters like Reaper, who can teleport around, Tracer with their ability to rewind and move forward very quickly. You can't do that same impact in a 2D setting. And this is why, of course, we see the vast majority of games in 3D. It just allows for more complicated mechanics and systems. But as we've said over the last 10 minutes, 2D will probably not be dying out anytime soon. There's still a lot of ways we can enhance 2D games, and the fact that 2D platformers and Metroidvania style games still are exciting and great to play today as they were 5, 10, and even 15 years ago. And I'm sure as I'm talking, there are probably more unique 2D games being developed. And to wrap up today's critical thought, it's still kind of weird to look at it like this. You would think that considering how much the industry is about moving forward, that we wouldn't have 2D games anymore. But as we said, that's not the case. And I'm really excited about Cuphead. I want to dive into Soul and Sanctuary at some point, and there's still plenty of room for evolving and iterating on these mechanics in the indie market. And who knows, maybe we'll see more interesting games coming from AAA. As we've seen with Mario, of course, like the Paper Mario games, and even Super Mario 3D World, and how they have sort of like 2D and then 2.5D. But again, we can certainly delve into other topics today if we want to, but we'll save those for future critical thoughts. Again, to summarize this critical thought up, 2D will probably not die. The advantages of working in the two-dimensional plane makes it a lot easier to design games, and there's still room for evolving. But 3D still has its unique advantages in terms of storytelling and depth of mechanics and systems. And I think we can certainly say at this point that the game industry is certainly big enough for both dimensions. But with that said, we're going to wrap up today's critical thought. Once again, thank you to everyone who is subscribing. Be sure to vote for the 900 Let's Play, and come back in a few days for that little campfire chat about Game Wisdom. With all that said, I'm still Josh Bycer from GameWisdom.com, where we examine the art and science of games. Thanks for tuning in to today's critical thought. Be sure to come back tomorrow for more great content on GameWisdom.com, and of course here on the YouTube channel. Have a great day, and a great weekend for those of you watching this on Friday. Take care. Thank you so much for watching this video. If you enjoyed it, be sure to like and subscribe to the channel, and of course share with your friends. It always helps out. For daily posts on all manner of game design and industry topics, check out game-wisdom.com. To support the site and everything that I do, be sure to check out the Patreon campaign. If we can hit goals, it will mean more content for everyone to enjoy, and I'll be able to support myself and my household. If you want to follow me, you can find me on Twitter at GWBycer for updates throughout the day and random thoughts from me. And lastly, you can find me on Twitch right over there at GWBycer for daily streams most nights around 10 Eastern. Thanks again for watching the video, and be sure to check out more great content coming to the Game Wisdom channel real soon.